Hey, what's up, everybody? Jason from White Knuckle Productions. Welcome to the White Knuckle Podcast, episode number 13. Well, today we're joined by a guest like we've never had before, Mr. Jarrod Scheffler from Whitetail Adrenaline. For any of you that have gone to any of the trade shows around the United States, or at least in the Midwest, you've probably seen Jarrod's booth for Whitetail Adrenaline. They produce videos that are 100% self-funded. They have no sponsors, and they definitely do their own thing. And after listening to this podcast, you'll understand exactly what I mean. So with that, sit back, relax, and enjoy our conversation with Mr. Jarrod Scheffler. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the White Knuckle Podcast, episode number 13. Today, I've got my trusty sidekick, Dave, my filming partner. I've got my esteemed co-host, Todd, on the other end, and joined somewhere in the world is Jarrod Scheffler from Whitetail Adrenaline. How's it going, Jarrod?
Good. I'm actually from Wisconsin, if you need to know, but everything's going good here.
I did know that. I just, it sounds like you frequent the country.
Well, I get around a little bit to a few states, I guess. Yeah, quite a few.
There's way too many cheeseheads on this line, if you ask me.
What? Come on now. Be careful now. You're walking on thin ice, Todd.
Right. I'm just sitting here admiring my copy of North American Whitetail with a studly looking guy in a recurve on the front cover, wondering what it must be like to be famous.
Oh, good grief. You had to go bringing it up like that, didn't you?
I'm sorry, I couldn't resist, man.
Yeah. You know that makes me a little bit awkward when people do that, and so that's why you had to go about doing that, didn't you?
Well, we had to serve it up, right, man. I would say of all the people I've met over the years doing the trade shows, Jarrod has become one of my best friends and a guy I really look up to and respect a lot in this industry. And oh God, it's been going on now close to 10 years since we've met, and he's been doing his thing. And it always cracked me up because year after year we'd come back and hit the trade show circuit again and end up having a drink here and there and catching up on deer stories. And Jarrod was always just one of the hardest working guys who was at all the shows, busting his butt. And that didn't stop once the hunting season started. Jarrod was all over the place. And to be honest with you, what I love about Jarrod was that he kind of has a way of doing things, and he doesn't look at what anybody else is doing. He does his own thing. And that could not ring more true in your videos, and also your hunting styles, which I completely respect and think are so rad because nobody else does this stuff, man. What Jarrod does with these deer, I'm going to let him get into it later, but he takes it to a whole different level that I've never seen before, just really watching your videos. And then to do it on camera alone is like, you might as well raise the bar beyond. But that's what you've done, and that's your personality. So, Jarrod, if you want, give us your 50,000 foot view of how did you get into hunting and how did that turn into Whitetail Adrenaline and going on the road and the glory of it all.
Yeah, that's a long story. I don't know if I can tell the whole thing, but I'll try and give you a short version. I grew up on a small dairy farm in Wisconsin, west central Wisconsin, around a big public land swamp. But I grew up on a small dairy farm, and back then, that was, 25 years ago, I guess, I'm 32, so approximately 25 years ago. Back in those times and in that area that we lived, we could hunt a lot of the local farmers' ground too, but that was about the same quality. Nobody managed or anything like that. It was about the same quality as the public land. So we didn't look at the public land like it was any different really than private land, like maybe nowadays a person would. And then my dad, he was a big influence in hunting. And he was also a big influence in as far as, working hard. It was always working on the farm from the time I can remember being a little boy. There was chores to do around the farm, and it was like if you were getting off the farm, it was for hunting or fishing most likely, or football. That was the only other, kind of out or getaway, I guess you could say. So hunting just really kind of, I guess, was what I did a lot of fishing back then, but hunting really, I guess, hooked me the most. And, I remember when I was a small boy, during Wisconsin deer gun season, but in Wisconsin, doing small deer drives or even big deer drives is kind of a traditional thing. And a lot of times you'd have like 6-8 guys. And I remember before the school bus would get there, usually I could get like one drive in being a driver. I was probably 5-6 years old when I started doing that. I remember, I used to love going into the cornfields, and I'd peek down the rows, and I'd spot one laying there, and then I'd crawl up and I'd see how close I could get to it. I never did actually touch one. I got very close to touching one once, but I just loved that. And once I could start hunting at the age of 12, when my dad would take me out into the woods or out into a place to hunt, there was never a tree stand. My dad had a few that he had built many years ago, long before I was around, but I think he built them and quickly realized that it's just way easier for me to climb up a tree and hunt out of that. Not the most safe, but to give you an idea, when my dad would take me out in the woods hunting, he'd be, okay, this looks like a good spot or whatever, and do you think he can get up there in that little crotch of that little tree or get up on that branch or whatever? It'd be like 15, 20 feet, up there, and, safety straps more than anything of the nature either. Not saying that that's a good thing, but I guess it kind of maybe carved me into a little bit of okay, we'll just do this or do that kind of mentality. I guess if that kind of makes sense. And so and sometimes we'd hunt on the ground a little bit too if there wasn't a good tree. But that's I guess a little bit about how I grew up hunting. And then when I shortly out of high school, an opportunity opened up. I was working at a sports shop, and an opportunity came about for me to hunt some private ground in central Buffalo County, just a invite kind of deal or whatever. And so I started hunting that, and that's basically where I did all my hunting from about 18 to 21 or 22, somewhere in there. I guess, 23 was the last year. So 5 years. 5 years I was out there. And when I started hunting that ground, I just got really into, I don't know how to explain it, but I shifted my whole style of hunting and everything. And I just began to find myself more and more miserable each year. And there was a lot of other people that could hunt that ground too. This farmer would let, quite a few other people hunt, and had a lot of different, 400 or 500 acres, I suppose. And I was always kind of, in the summertime, I'd watch these deer and I'd get kind of attached to them, which is natural to do. And, there's certain ones that I want to see get a little bit older or grow another year or whatnot. But when they get shot, I'd find myself just irritated, but I had no ground really to stand on. It wasn't my ground or anything like that, so I just kind of had to suck it up. But, I just felt like I was caged up a little bit, and I was miserable, and I started to kind of evaluate what was, in inches was like, that's what I set my bar for. That's all I looked at, which I love chasing big deer as much as the next guy, much as you do, Todd, or anybody else. Yeah. But I was so caught up in it that I just found myself miserable. And then I remember, and I was also filming, with a pretty good camera at the time, but not filming, for anything in particular. And
you just kind of self-filming for yourself at the time?
Yeah, or buddies and I would switch off, and we were doing stuff kind of like what in the fashion that you'd see on television back then. So that was kind of in the 03, 04, 05 era, kind of in there. And then I was trying to figure out what was going on inside of me, why I was so miserable. Hunting's all I ever knew. I loved it, and why I was so miserable. And I was trying to figure out, was it something to do with the filming or what? So I took the whole 06 season off, didn't film. I went hunting, of course, but I just kind of was like, I'm going to go back to it. I'm going to try to figure out what makes me tick or whatever. And I remember there wasn't that great quality of deer on the ground there that year. And I remember there was this 8-pointer. It was a spindly deer, not that impressive really. I remember he was chasing a deer off this one hill out in the field. And he was 300-400 yards out, and I realized they were headed down to this creek that I could hunt. That was part of the farm. And I Z-line, made like a sprinting dash, like 150 yards. And I got there, and the doe was busting in at the same time I'm getting there. and she's like 40, 50 yards, and she goes running through the creek. The buck is right behind her, stops right in the creek to get a drink of water. And at that point, I was at full draw. And I mean, believe it or not, I actually made a really good shot on him. Yeah, well,
oh man, that's hilarious.
He's seen my videos over the years, so he knows I've missed plenty of deer. But, you know, I was just lit up. Like, it was like, wow, this is awesome. You know, I haven't hunted like this in a while, you know. And
it just was on a whim, Jared. It just happened.
Yeah, it was completely on a whim. Completely on a whim. And in fact, you get a kick out of this. I had an hour of light left, and I wasn't even planning on going hunting that night because I had a transmission that was out in my truck, and I was in the middle of taking the transmission out of the truck, and I was doing it by myself, and I'm trying to, you know, I don't know, it was just kicking my butt, basically. And, I mean, I had transmission fluid on my shooters. I didn't even care. I was like, whatever, I just got to get away from here. So I grabbed my bow and was like, I went down to the spot where, you know, sometimes, you know, I'd see bucks out in the fields or whatever. And I thought, well, I'll just kind of on a whim, just like you said. But it, you know, it completely like ignited me. Like, wow, that was really cool. And it was actually the smallest buck that I ever shot on that farm, but yet it, you know, ignited me. And I was like, okay, so there's more to it than for hunting, for me, to what gets me fired up. There's more to it than just the size of the deer. I'd killed the biggest deer I'd ever killed at that point in my life the year before. And after killing that deer, I realized, like, wow, why do I feel still like it's not good enough, or it's not, you know, and
not as satisfying.
A lot of it. Yeah. It just came down to, I think, you know, some of the elements for me personally that, make or break a hunt, or make it better, or make it a little bit sweeter. And so, there's another situation on a public land hunt in North Dakota I did that year, where I was up a tree, and it was never been into this piece before. Went out there, hung the tree stand, saw this buck chasing a doe a few hundred yards away, rattled him down, nice 10-pointer, shot him. I was like, wow, that was cool. Walking in a piece I'd never been on before, or whatever. That was cool, you know. It was out of a tree, but it was still cool, you know. And there was a couple other deer I shot that year. One in particular, and I knew this deer was coming out to this field, and it was with my muzzle loader. And I went out there and I set up I had a double bull blind at the time. And I went out there and I set it up, and I couldn't find anything better on the farm to shoot. And I pretty much knew this deer was going to come out there. He had been, and sure enough, he came out, and I waited, you know, perfect angle, everything like that. And I shot him, and he dropped right there. And for some reason, that hunt is a very memorable hunt, but kind of, for me, it was like not fulfilling. It wasn't the kind of hunt that, for me personally. And so I had a buddy there that I guess I didn't live with him at the time, but that's where I did live there. He's the guy that got me onto the farm and stuff, and he loved hunting out of it. And so I just gave him the blind, like he'd get more enjoyment out of it than I would. But that's, you know, like I said, a few different things that started to kind of steer me in the direction of, just pointed me where we are today, and evaluating what makes me tick in hunting, and how I take an animal or hunt an animal has a lot to do with it. And it's on a personal level. It's not, I don't try to push my, you know, I guess different people hunt for different reasons, different, you know, things make different people tick. So it's on a personal level for me, but that's to explain why we hunt on the ground and aggressive like that, or why I do. And I guess the rest of the guys just don't really have a choice, because I'm just like, well, we're doing it on the ground. Well, everybody's got a choice, but you know, I mean, that's just what we've done. 2009 was the last year that we hunted out of tree stands, and nothing against tree stands. There's more than one way to skin a cat. Yep. Part of that also was, we realized that we could just get a lot more encounters, cover a lot more acreage. When you're dealing with public land, a lot of acreage isn't worth a person's time. And when you're hunting on the ground like that, you can eliminate a lot of that acreage in a very short time fashion. And you're not strapped to it. You know, you run into other hunters, or things change, you can adapt a lot quicker to situations.
And for anybody listening who has never seen a Whitetail Adrenaline video, the tactics that we're talking about is literally, in some of the earlier videos, I remember watching them and like, okay, Jared's getting out of the tree. He can't sit there any longer. He'd see a deer and go after him. And like over the years, you kind of watch the videos and like they literally will go into a piece of public land and go after big bucks right on the ground. And some of the deer that he's killed over the years in videos, one in in Iowa here, I remember you killed a giant 8-pointer off the ground. And that was kind of one of the first moments. I was living and hunting in Iowa. I'd moved here and knocked on doors and thought to myself, well, I'd never want to even consider hunting public land here. And that was kind of one of those moments, Jared, when I watched that video and saw you kill that big buck and using those tactics that opened my eyes. I was like, wow, you're not just trying to do something different. You're actually doing it, and you're successful with it and getting really, really close to these big deer, especially during the rut, which is, I think, to me, I just love your style because it's your own, and I could see how your whole life is kind of, evolved around what you enjoy doing, and I think you're lucky for that, and I'm kind of lucky in the same way. I chase deer for different reasons and stuff, but go back to when you first started hunting public land. You mentioned something about North Dakota. I remember seeing a bunch of episodes about North Dakota and stuff. I guess, where did you start scouting and looking for new properties when you realized that you wanted to go, abroad or out of state? What was that like for you?
Well, that's I'm glad you brought that up. Just so I'm clear, the first video we ever did is the only one that's not in all public. That was a by permission and a public. And it actually shows some of that ground that I was talking about. That was the last season that I hunted that ground in central Buffalo County. And there was 2 farms I could hunt there. And I could probably go back and hunt them today. There was no falling out or anything like that. It was just a choice. There was no mystery left for me anymore there. And so then the next season is when we decided, let's do public land. Let's do all public land. My cousin and I, we grew up, he grew up on the other side of the big public land swamp from me, and we grew up hunting together quite a bit. And so we were like, let's do that. That'd be cool, and he'd done a couple out-of-state trips. I had done a couple, 3 or 4, maybe something like that. And so we did that first season, all public land. That's actually the worst season we've ever had. And it's, a lot of people don't know this, but it's the only season where we actually pre-scouted stuff.
I love it.
Well, I mean, I'm not saying, and I'll get to that in a little bit, why it makes sense and how I kind of connected the dots on that later on. A few years after that, it started to make a little bit more sense to me. It was actually a pretty good season, really. I mean, we shot 4 bucks that year for public land, pretty decent bucks. That big one that you're talking about in Iowa, that big 8-pointer, that was one of them. We hadn't done a lot of pre-scouting. The Iowa hunt wasn't one that we did, but there was a little bit that we had done, North Dakota. And some of the pre-scouting that I'm talking about is just even simply looking at stuff on aerials, and whatnot, which isn't necessarily bad. But after that season, I was so broke and trying to build a business and trying to work on the side. Honestly, I just didn't have time to pre-scout, really, is what it came down to. And that next season came and we had a little bit more results. We got a little bit more aggressive though, too. And I didn't really realize it at that time. Here again, I connected the dots later on. And then the following season is when we were like, I was like, the footage is cool on the ground. I love hunting on the ground. It seems like we get on the ground, we get aggressive, we get on more deer, we get more encounters. So that next season was regroup. And that was the first year we did all on the ground. And I take that back. There was one situation in North Dakota where we hung the tree stands only to look over some grass to get a visual, and then we were going to climb down. Well, I didn't even have the second tree stand hung, and we had one spotted already. So that's the only time that we hung tree stands in 2010, and we didn't even do anything with them besides use them to get a visual, and that was our whole plan. But anyways, after that season, it was like a surge in encounters and opportunities on big, pretty big deer. In fact, there was one. It was named like an 18-pointer. It was a big deer. I think it really only had 16 points, but some guys hunting some private land nearby named him an 18-pointer and whatnot. So we did too. But that only had 16. Anyways, after that season, it was just such a massive surge, and we had such a ball doing it, such a great time, even though there was a lot of, unfortunate situations, a lot of situations where we didn't capitalize. We had such a great time out there that, it was like, my outlook on it was like, well, let's get better. We'll try and get better at, closing the deal on these deer, and why not do it again? We got a lot more action out of the season. And to this day, we still make a lot of mistakes that I thought we would shore that up more than we have. But at the end of the day, I mean, we still, every season, it seems like we have a pretty great season. I mean, ever since I hunted counters and getting up a year ago, as far as talking a little bit about the pre-scouting, dealing with public land can be beneficial more than our style. However, most people don't guard their attachment to spots and locations and sign and things of that nature. And a lot of times they find it in the spring or even the week before, or even the day before, they find hot spots and they end up locking themselves down, and they're already, and, if they're going on a 5-day out-of-state trip or whatever, rather than ditching that spot and going to try to find something new, they end up locking down, just hoping and praying that it's going to light up any day here. And oftentimes up rotations, and a lot of times these crops are on private ground that border the public, but it still affects the deer that are on the public ground. I guess what I'm trying to say is pre-scouting can definitely benefit a person on public land, but it can also really hurt a person if they don't guard themselves from getting emotionally attached and locked down to, all that sign or visuals or whatever that might be. Does that kind of make sense?
Oh, it's like hunting a big deer. You throw an anchor out and then emotionally you're done, because once they've got you, then it's really hard for us humans with these big brains to move off of that and go on to something else, just like what you're talking about. And for me, I'm always fascinated because I grew up hunting public land up in northern Michigan, and kind of just came to the conclusion, like, okay, to achieve the results that I was going for, which was big mature deer, which kind of like you at the time, Jared, it was all about inches, or big racks. And since then, I really don't care that much about the racks, just the maturity level. But when you go out and you're hunting these different pieces of public land, let's just use North Dakota as an example, because I know you guys have been out there several times. Will you go back to the same haunts year after year, or are you always trying to explore new territories?
A lot of times, Todd, in a situation where we had a great, what we'd say a productive hunt or location out of state, a lot of times we'll go back there and we'll start there, but we'll quickly scrap that. Like basically if we can tell within it could be in an hour or two, depending on the ground or whatever, we might be able to tell in an hour or two, or it might take a half a day or a day. But if it's cold and it's not like it was the year before or whatever, we're pulling out and we're spending our time trying to find the next best honey hole. And I keep that in the forefront of my brain as far as even when I'm hunting a spot that was hot. Okay, let's say we had a great day out. There's great activity. We've seen 1, 2, 3, 4 big bucks here, whatever that might be. And it was just lit up. We'll start there the next day a lot of times, but again, we'll be ready at the instant we feel it's cold to pull the plug. And maybe we'll come back in a couple, 3 days and check it out. But right now, that day, if it's cold, we're pulling out. We're going to go spend our time trying to find something else. And a good example of that was actually in that regroup video. We had a phenomenal day the first day that we got to this ground in Iowa. And I had never been on the ground before, never been on that piece. And we tiptoed in there. And I think we saw 3 or 4 big bucks that morning. I mean, it was just, to me, it was just unbelievable. I was like, are you kidding me? I mean, it was just crawling. But we got back in there the next day, and we could tell within a half hour, 45 minutes, it was ice cold. And Scott was with me, and we both said, you know what? It's cold. Let's get out of here. Let's go check out this other public ground 10, 15 miles away. So we went and did that, and we got on another big one. in a very short time doing that. And that didn't produce. I hit a deer high in no man's land. We spent the rest of that day trying to catch up to him and didn't. And we pulled out and went to Kansas for 3 days. Scott had a tag. And then we came back to Iowa and went into the original piece, assuming that our activity level, a lot of those deer knew that we were in there. We were fairly aggressive with it, but it gave that location time to settle down and maybe get back to the way it was or whatnot. And we tiptoed in there, and now we knew the areas that we had to, slow down, slow our pace, put the brakes on. And that's when I shot a pretty good 8-pointer on that hunt that day, that morning, within, 45 minutes of daylight in that piece doing that. So that's where, it was cold. We pulled out right away, recognized it. And then that whole situation went south, gave it a few days, came back to the original spot. Now we knew where to put on the brakes and everything. And, when you're hunting deer on the ground, it's constantly a battle of passive aggressive, moving fast enough to cover the acreage that's dead, but slow enough to, you're recognizing when you need to put on the brakes. And sometimes you don't know. There's no way to really put it down in a book. We make those mistakes every single season, dang it, should have put on the brakes a little bit more or whatever. That's hunting. That's the way it is. We're humans. We're always going to make mistakes.
So in Jared's world, what constitutes cold? I know what it means to me, but what it means to me sitting on private ground maybe isn't that much different than what it means to you. But I think how we get to cold or deciding it's cold is probably vastly different.
Well, let me just stop for a second. When you said what decides whether it's cold, I was getting ready to tell you when I can't feel my fingers anymore, and then I realized you're talking about a different kind of cold. For me, and what we do is we typically almost always base everything off of visuals. And the reason we do that, I walk into a piece and there's a lot of fresh big rubs, scrapes, big tracks. I'm going to treat that with a little bit more respect than a place that's, dead. But at the end of the day, if we don't get a visual in 1 or 2 times into that piece, I'm going to assume that activity is probably coming from private land, and coming over there at night, especially if it's a very pressured area. So I'm just going to completely rather than get attached to all this sign, like some guys would, or I might in my earlier years, I'm just going to assume that, and I'm going to go try to find something that's going to work a little bit easier for us, a little bit better. Not to take the easy road, because it's still not easy. But realistically, if those deer are across on private ground, there's nothing I can do about it, other than maybe call to them if I, rattle or whatever, try to call them across. But you know how that works. A lot of times that's just a shot in the dark. So
hey, Jared,
depending on the situation, that is.
This is Dave. I got just to expound on that a little bit.
Yeah.
When you hit these public areas, you're not maybe pre-scouting them a lot, but are you using like aerial photography and things like that to make it kind of a strategic strike? Or do you just kind of park the truck and head out?
A lot of times, I'll quickly pull up an aerial, and I'm doing that anyways, because, I want to see exactly where the property lines are, unless I've been there before, know exactly where they are. But then I know what the lay of the land looks like too. So on an initial spot, yes, a lot of times I'll quickly pull it up, be like, okay, I think we should come in from this direction. But, ultimately when I see it firsthand with my set of eyes, I guess I kind of go off of that. And I don't stick, I always say the goal is in stone, the plan is in sand, meaning the goal is to, get on a big buck. I'll scrap the plan if I feel we need to and try something else if it's not working. Does that kind of make sense? So when you're hunting on the ground like that, you can be very adaptable and very, light on your feet to be able to do that. In fact, so light, I wear sneakers. That's exactly what I wear hunting. I don't even
really.
Oh yeah. I haven't wore hunting boots in
Oh my
5-6 years. Other than when it gets extremely cold and I need something really, really warm. But I mean, it's got to get really cold for me to do that, because I just like being light on my, I literally like having light. I got big feet as it is. And so I like super light, low top tennies. I wear a pair of Solomons that are actually like race shoes. So they're really light. And if it's very wet out, I just wear like some really light high top hikers. But I like that because you can feel a little bit more what's under your feet when you are putting a sneak on a big buck, and carrying all that extra weight on your feet when you're covering ground out there, especially like and some of the hunts we do where there's a lot of hills and bluffs and stuff. It gets to be at the end of the day, your feet get tired, and it's like, man, do I really want to climb up that ridge? And it starts to add up. So I like, I like wearing something just super light on my feet.
One of the things I think that I relate to so well with Jarrod is like what he was just talking about is the adaptability. They're basically putting themselves in a situation where they have no choice but to adapt to that moment, because you can literally step to the right, step to the left, move forward or back. When you're up in a tree stand, you're somewhat restricted. And years ago, I started just taking my tree stand down and moving it to where I wanted to hunt. And then slowly but surely, through years of experience, you start getting that gut feeling. And that's what Jarrod's following when he's out in the field, when he knows, all right, it's time to move and there's time to run. You're not thinking about it and planning it. It's just you do it right now. And I think that's what takes just years of experience and encounters and mistakes where you can start to follow your gut a little bit more. And I almost feel like when I'm in that predator mode, you almost feel some sort of a connection to what our Native Americans must have felt, or, where you almost can feel the heart of the earth pumping through your veins, just feeling like a predator. So I will say this much. I wouldn't have the kahunas to jump out of a tree and go after one of the bucks that I'm going after in the areas that I hunt. But, dude, watching Jarrod do it is probably one of my favorite videos for that reason, just because it's so different. But I have a question from just if guys like myself are trying to do this, do you, everything we do is based on wind. When you guys are going in on these hunts, do you plan your stalks based on wind, or by where you assume they're bedding, or how does wind play into your factor?
Yeah. No, I definitely count the wind quite a bit. Years ago, when I hunted solo, I figured out pretty much how to beat their nose about every time. I had a system that would work for me. But when we started, hunting public land, in and out of the vehicles, going from spot to spot, 2 of us out there, I mean, it just it would become so much of a hassle to do the steps that I had to take to be able to do that, that it would limit our mobility and it would just make it a little bit more miserable and difficult. So we do play the wind, I guess is what I'm trying to say, or try to. If we suspect, okay, if they're going to be bedding, they're going to be bedding here. Yeah, we're going to approach that. A lot of times I like to approach crosswind on situations, but not always. I mean, I'll come in straight downwind sometimes, but especially when I'm going after a buck, a lot of times I find myself using a crosswind, and I call it cheating the wind. If you're in a situation where you've got a constant wind where it's not really affected so much by the terrain, it's continually blowing in one direction. I mean, that deer's almost got to be right on that scent string to catch you. So you've got a very big window to work with. So then it just comes down to a couple of variables. Like, let's say we got one spotted. Let's say he's laying down or just, not moving. He's in a whatever. We don't think he's going anywhere for a little while. Well, first thing when I see big buck is I'm going to right away. It's like, is he on the go? Does he seem like he's going to be on the go, or does he seem like he's going to be there a while? Because that's going to affect how I'm going to come at that deer. Because if I think there's a pretty good chance he's not going to hang around there very long wherever he's at, I'm going to try to predict what route he's going to take, and I'm going to try to come at him from that direction in case he does decide to move. Then, I've hopefully got him that way. But if he doesn't, and he stays right there, hopefully that route will take me in. And a lot of times I do find that I'm not straight downwind of them in these situations, but you're just cheating the wind, and you're always keeping a reference of exactly where that scent is. So that way, if an opportunity does arise, let's say he gets on his feet or whatever, and moves in, you know exactly where you got to take. Just like when you're hunting out of a tree, you know where your scent stream is. Like, I got to shoot him literally before he gets to this point. Otherwise, he's maybe going to smell me. There's a decent chance, especially when there's two guys out there. It's just twice the scent. So
you bet.
So yeah, those are some different things that run through my head. And one thing I just want to make clear and fair is, this style of hunting that I've got, it's, what we do, out there hunting public lands, if I wouldn't say that this is necessarily a good strategy from my understanding, I think, Todd, you hunt a lot of small acreage, ground, private ground on big deer, big mature old deer, wise deer. So hunting like this, you could completely, mess your whole chances up for the rest of the year on one attempt on, trying to do what we're doing. So, your strategy and what you found works, it's very effective. And that makes sense why it is because, you're going to blow them over onto the neighbors. Maybe you're hunting a 20 acre or 40 acre or whatever woodlot, maybe even smaller, and boom, one chance on a 5, 6, 7-year-old, maybe even older deer. And you know how they like that. So
sure. Well, I have the advantage of knowing where that animal spends most of his days and be able to strategize about that, where you guys have a snapshot in time where you're there now. And it's an expendable property, so to speak, because you're hunting public. So you're going to be on to the next one later that afternoon or whatever. And so you can increase your aggressiveness. And I have to do the same thing, except I just am doing it from a different direction. But what you've started to influence me, Jared, on how I'm hunting some of my stands. I've got a lot of unbelievable bedding area stands that are really, really tight into these bedding areas, these doe bedding areas. So during the rut, I've been now stalking to my stands, getting in there, and my favorite tactic now is I'm a visual person. I think I'm in tune. I hate being in the woods in the dark. I always seem to get busted in the dark when I can't see anything, can't see what's going on. I would rather stalk into some of my bedding area spots now and just take, like, if you got 3 hours to hunt, I'll take an hour to get in that stand. Just
Todd, it's okay to say you're scared.
I hate that. But
hey, you know what? If you're scared, I get scared too. Because the same thing is, I mean, a lot of these places, just like what you said, Todd, I used to, be like, oh, I got to be in there an hour before the sun comes up. Well, sometimes those deer are already in there, they're already in there. And like you said, you can't see what's going on ahead of you. And so a lot of times we don't hit the woods until we can actually see what's going on. And the other thing, you brought up a good point, for guys that are stand hunters, which most people are, is a lot of people don't do this, but what you're saying is you're stalking and sneaking your way to that tree stand to not only keep a low key, but who knows, maybe there's an opportunity. You see him, maybe he's laying too close to where you can't even get into the tree, or you just never know. But a lot of people, don't do that. And I never really used to do that great of a job of that either. I used to kind of be a little bit more in the mentality of, oh, I got to get to my tree. The sun's going to crest here soon. And you rush in there when it's like, you know what, I should just take my time and sneak my way in there and stalk my way in there. And so, yeah.
You hit the nail on the head, and it goes back to all of our early trainings of watching Jackie Bushman run around at TNN Outdoors. You ain't going to kill them if you're not in the tree stand, folks. So you're doing the 500-yard sprint running through the woods. And I mean, I've literally read articles online, guys running through the woods, grunting. I mean, we've heard it all over the years. But that's where I've started to, in my maturity, slow down a little bit going in. And then the other part of it too is I learned so much visually just going into stands, and even some of these bedding area spots where I know a lot of guys would never attempt hunting some of these bedding area spots in the afternoons. And where I'm hunting, the different animals, and depending on where the farm is itself or the property I'm hunting, sometimes I'm intentionally putting pressure in certain areas. Like, I'm going to clear it out, make sure he's not there. And if he's not, I'm going to make sure he's not going to be there. So, but you have to do it lightly in certain ways, use the wind, whatever. But, it's all about adaptability to those situations. And speaking of adaptability to situations, one of my favorite aspects of the Whitetail Adrenaline crew are that they are all certified mechanics and happen to run into more automobile problems than anybody in the history of hunting and outdoor television, and that's just in one season. it is probably my favorite aspect of following the team over the years. And I think you guys are getting more reliable videos now, but what you all might not realize about Jared and the Whitetail Adrenaline guys is they don't have any sponsors. So they're 100% self-funded. And Jared's been building this brand for so many years, and we've been watching him doing it. And so you've hunted in some of the most awesome rigs of all time. Why don't you go through some of your favorite hunting rigs that you have featured in your videos over the years?
Well, the 99 Mercury Sable with the salvage title that I got for $200, that will always hold a special place in my heart. But my favorite, and then the Taurus that came after that one, what do we have? 260-some thousand miles on that one. And the last hunt that vehicle made it was when I shot this big velvet deer in Wyoming. And I remember Shay and we had that vehicle loaded down, and the shocks were completely out of it. And by the end of that trip, we were just like, we need something else. So then we got a minivan, which the minivan was a little, at the time we got the minivan, the minivan, well, the first video had a minivan in it too, but at the time we got this minivan, it was a little bit too nice for our liking. I mean, it was, we got a good deal, found it on Craigslist, good deal, one owner or two owners, something like that, rust free, well, it didn't take long and the rust started coming, and it was mint when, it was like, wow, this is way too nice for us. But of course now it's getting right there to the Sable Taurus, condition, and it's still going. My favorite is probably the conversion van. In fact, I think I'm going to get another one because
vans are cool.
It's just, the conversion van, it was just so comfortable and just, you felt like you were in your living room a little bit. And when you're out there and some of these hunts, I mean, we spend, depending on the state, we put on a lot of miles, and a lot of those miles are gravel roads. And, sometimes I think people don't realize just how many miles get put on, and hard miles put on these vehicles. I mean, I don't even want to talk about the speeds that minivan's been going down gravel roads before. I know in North Dakota one time with the Taurus, I was riding passenger and Al was going, and, I wasn't paying much attention. Just, out in North Dakota, if you've ever been there, it's pretty desolate, and it's pretty, I don't know. It can get pretty boring and monotonous when you're driving all these gravel roads in 90 degrees and whatnot, checking out different places. And I remember he had it going, it was like 95 or 100 miles an hour. And we weren't even paying attention. We were just cruising. I mean, the thing was it was just like we were on a highway, and all of a sudden it was like, whoa, we better shut her down a little bit here.
Oh my gosh. So, the stuff you guys have done in
those
cars.
Vehicles, yeah. I mean, those vehicles see a hard, few months out of the year. I would venture to guess there's probably 10,000 gravel road miles put on, in one of our vehicles in a fall. So.
Well, I would say the catalyst of this whole discussion is, you all are out there. Imagine we're wondering what Jared's hunting with this year. This past year, was it just past year when you killed the big one?
Well, it was 2015.
Okay, 2015. Jared decided he's going to hunt with a longbow, not even a recurve, and goes out.
I've been hunting with that since 2012.
Okay, so, well, he's all right. He's been
just to be fair, and I missed every deer I shot at that season on video.
So, it's not hard enough already. You're in a Sable. You don't want to use a compound bow. That's that's way too easy. So he goes out and shoots. Is it the biggest public land whitetail ever on video?
I don't think it's the biggest. Well, it might be the biggest on video, but to be fair, the final shot, we had to get permission to pursue the deer. So the final, the initial shot was on public, but the final shot, it was on ground that we had gotten permission to go on. So to be fair, it's not 100%. The whole hunt didn't unfold 100% on public land. So
well, after hearing the story,
comfortable. Yeah.
After hearing the story of that buck that you told me, and if we did a podcast, it would take 4 or 5 episodes just to do the story on that one buck. But it happened over 4 days, and it's a story of a guy who's just not going to give up. And at that point, especially, if you got an arrow in one and you're chasing it, it doesn't matter where you end up putting the final arrow in it. What matters is that you made yourself go out there and absolutely do everything you possibly could to recover the animal, and you ended up getting rewarded and big time because the thing ended up scoring close to 200 inches, didn't it?
Yep, just shy of 200. With the kickers, it was 197 and 7/8.
A giant typical, and that's what makes it so special. Is it is an absolute giant frame typical. And actually, if you get a chance, if you're going to be going up to the Madison show, stop by the Whitetail Adrenaline booth. He's got a full body mount of the thing jumping over his booth. It's absolutely awesome.
Yeah, we'll be there this weekend. So, are you coming? That's the better question.
Absolutely. I think myself, Dave, and Jason will all be making the Madison show hustle.
Absolutely. We'll all be there at one point or another.
That'll probably bank at about 40 shows over the years that I've seen you at, Todd.
Oh, my God.
If not more.
And that's what nobody knows. You know, we talk about these deer hunting season and stuff, but the friendship and the time Jared and I have got to spend together have been mostly all at trade shows, where if you have never done the trade show circuit, it sounds like a lot of fun after about 9 years and talking to millions and millions of people. It is a lot of fun, but holy cow, it's a lot of work just to get to those shows, get set up. And I will say this much, there's no one in the business who works harder and plays harder than this guy right there. Jared and his crew you guys are crazy. Like I'm getting way too old for all that fun that we used to have at the shows, but you guys, I will just say is the best booth in the show at any show. You always got to stop by and see how the Whitetail Adrenaline boys are doing.
Well, thanks. Yeah, we might have a little too good a time sometimes, but you know, I mean, it's a lot of work. You know, going out there, you know how it is, and you know, I think back to, I think it was the first 4 or 5 years I did shows. Most people don't know this, but I didn't even have a driver's license to get there to the shows, and you know, I think back to some of those, you know, going out to Pennsylvania and I got a great story. I'm not going to, I won't take time to tell that one, but, yeah, I mean, I just think back to, you know, all of that. And it's just, I mean, it's been 9 show seasons of doing it. And there's a lot of work that goes into it. And, it's one of those things that I'd miss it if I didn't do it anymore. But by the end of it, you know how it is. I guess this last weekend was the first weekend since the end of January that we didn't have a show where we weren't on the road. And it gets to be a lot after a while, but it's a lot of fun, and we definitely do enjoy doing it. So
you got to live it, that's for sure, in order to do what you guys are doing. But like I said, if you guys haven't checked out Whitetail Adrenaline DVDs, it's one of the only DVDs I can even watch, and I enjoy just from the unique standpoint. Not only that, but you guys kind of did your own editing style right from the beginning, and it had a lot of parallels really with what I was trying to do with White Knuckle, but like totally different feel, totally different format, like absolutely yin and yang, but I think we've always had a real strong mutual respect for one another because love it or hate it, it was the way we decided to do it. And you've always stuck true to that all these years. And man, you see so many guys over the years that come and go, you know, trying to break in this scene, and especially doing DVDs, man, there are very few companies still around, and you guys are still being very successful at it. And I'm proud of you, man. And I'm happy that I got a chance to get to know you so many years ago, because you've helped influence the way I look at hunting. I know, and no matter what, whether you think you could ever see yourself doing a stalk or anything, like it makes you think. I'll tell you, you start looking across that field, and you're like, all right, it's 400 yards away. Well, what if I pulled a Jared? You know, so
well, and I mean, we've had a lot of people, especially over the last 3-4 years, you know, that have came up to us at a show or sent us an email or message or something, you know, along the lines of, you know, I did my first season on the ground and it was, you know, the best season I've ever had. Or people that went out and, you know, maybe climbed out of the tree stand. I've had guys, multiple guys that have told me, you know, that as well, you know, like I never thought to do that, or never, you know, and they've seen that they can do it too, I guess is what I'm trying to say. You know, this isn't some sort of gift that we're born with and nobody else can do it. I mean, it's something that, you know, you set your mind to it. Sure, not every stalk is going to be successful. I mean, and kind of like what I talked about earlier, you know, even to this day, I look back at, the last season, and there's so many, it's like, man, like I knew we shouldn't have done that, like I knew I shouldn't have, taken my time in this situation. I should have closed that gap a little bit quicker or whatever. We're still making mistakes to this day. We're human, but I guess what I'm trying to say is, I think a lot of people feel like they can't do that or they're not gifted with it. But I mean, you just got to get out there and you got to understand that it might be, we've had 10 stalks in a row that are unsuccessful. It's not every single one, and sometimes we've laid 2 out of 3 down, and it's like, wow, we're getting pretty good at this. And then all of a sudden you hit a streak where you're not capitalizing and it starts to play tricks on your brain. Like, what the heck? Like I thought we were getting good at this, so it's very humbling to hunt like that. And that's another thing that I do like about it is it takes you back so many times, so many situations. It takes you back to, feeling a little bit like, unachieved and that keeps you wanting more. When they win and they beat you, it makes you want more. You know how it is.
Oh, dude, I dig the tactic. And the other part of it too, is a lot of what my tactics revolve around is not necessarily just, trying to be deadly or do something that a buck's never seen, but trying to do stuff that no other hunters have ever done into those animals. So do you think part of your success on the ground is just that maybe, you're the first one actually trying to go in there during these times of the year and hunt with that type of a strategy? Do you think there's much of that, or is it just being patient and just being aggressive and putting yourself in the right spot?
I think you do definitely catch deer that are a little bit off guard, not expecting it. Deer aren't typically used to, being hunted on the ground, but, I don't think, and I think that sometimes depends on the situation, You get into areas where you got a lot of small game hunters or whatnot. Well, those deer don't know that they're not hunting them, so they treat that as maybe they are being approached from the ground, but I think a lot of that, a lot of our, footage that we get with a bow does come during the rut where their guard is down a little bit. And one thing about hunting deer on the ground is when you're going to that animal, you're not relying so much on whether it's a good rut, bad rut that year. You're not relying so much on, your weather condition. If it's, I take Kansas, for example, this last season, being on the road to the shows, I heard a lot of people talk about, it was 80 some degrees and worst season I've seen in Kansas. Well, Shane and I, we went out there, we had the least amount of time we've ever hunted Kansas. And we both tagged out in the least amount of time that we ever had. And we were out there during those really hot days when it was, I think, got up to 84, 86 or something like that one day.
Yep.
And, but our strategy is going to those animals. And so we're not dependent on, as much of what they're going to do. Yeah, exactly. All those other
daytime movement.
All those other factors that, from a stationary type hunting situation, you're relying heavily on. We don't have, when you're hunting on the ground like that and going to them, you don't have to rely on that as so much. So therefore, I think that has a lot to do with, over the past how many years that we've been doing on the ground, we haven't really had a real bad season, so to speak. I don't think, brazen resilience would be probably the worst, but we had the encounters. I think we had 18 bucks in bow range and only one arrow could get off the bow. Just that the situations weren't right to take the shot or whatever. And so we had the action, we just didn't capitalize on it. So that kind of makes sense.
You mentioned it earlier about just talking about big buck sign, going in there and like starting to realize the stuff's being done at night. So it doesn't matter how big that scrape is or how fresh that rub is. You're just not going to kill them in that particular spot. And I've started to recognize the same thing. I'm not hunting for bucks on nighttime trail camera pictures. I'm trying to kill them during daylight and everything. Right. So
right.
Just like in my area, those big mature deer, those 6-7 year old deer, over time, they either get killed or they become a recluse and live in those little spots. And that's what I've just started doing, is being a little bit more aggressive and going into those spots. But you've got to take the weather conditions that you've got going for you, the time period you got going for you, and make the best of it. And when I killed my buck this year, just like you guys, it was close to 70 degrees, but I had really incredibly strong winds one afternoon, and I was able to just get into a spot I would normally not go into, but the wind provided enough sound cover where, boom, I went in and killed him that night. I couldn't believe it, but it does happen. But you got to make them happen sometimes.
Right, and that's a good point you brought up. You kind of knew where that deer was bedding or close to where he was bedding, and you took advantage of the weather that day and the wind to be able to get in really tight on him. And the old deer that, by the sounds of it, was a very nocturnal type deer. And, you adapted quick, and I'm just going to go in there and get tight on him.
The other part, too, is, hey, man, up until that hunt, I had been on a bunch of different hunts this past fall. And by being aggressive like that, I'm always putting myself in the middle of the deer. So I get does and bucks downwind of me all the time. We use ozonics and scent crap, but sometimes you can't prevent getting busted, and you've got to be willing to take that chance. And you know what? Right. If you get blown at, you get blown at. But I would rather take a chance and blow it than sit back and wonder. That's kind of my personality. I think you kind of got that in your personality too. You'd rather go out and break something than look at a nice, pretty thing that's not used.
Right. And I mean, exactly. And the other thing, when we look at it like, we don't set any cameras out there, so we don't get locked down to any one particular deer, which when you're hunting public ground, I think that can really, it would drive me crazy. Just to chase to chase a lone deer. So, when we see a big buck, it's almost always, it's not a question of if we're going to go after him. It's very rare that we decide to put on the brakes. Very rare situations do we ever do that. I mean, it's basically all in. We're going to either get this deer or we're going to bust him trying. And if we bust him and don't get him, we're going to move on to the next one. And we're going to just keep moving and forget about him and just get on to trying to find the next big buck. And with public land, because of the acreage and resources, you're able to do that a little bit more than, say you got one or two or a few small farms. I mean, that'd be hard to kind of have that mentality, I guess, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. And when you're hunting public land, you're not just hunting, the deer on a piece of property. You're trying to dictate, or you're trying to hunt around other guys. You don't know who's been in there and blown it the day after, the next morning. You can only control so many things. So what you guys have become really, really successful at is controlling that moment in time and taking advantage of that moment in time. And you know what? Sometimes you blow it. Sometimes you get lucky. But if you don't try, you're never going to get any additional skills either. And I think, I think you gotta throw caution to the wind sometimes, and that's the way you learn. And my God, if you would have never went after that first deer, Jared, where would you be right now? It's just it's kind of cool to think about.
Yeah. Well, and our season wasn't going well up to that point, in that first public land video, and that was really a case of just getting aggressive. And one thing that didn't get told on the video, because we didn't have the footage to do it, but we had jumped that buck that morning about 200-300 yards from there, and he was with a doe. And, and that's the general direction they ran. And we've actually implemented that strategy a few different times now, where we've bumped bucks on does, gave them just a little bit of time and pressed on. And usually they're not that much further ahead. The benefit you have, as a hunter is, now, like somewhere up here within a few hundred yards, very, very extremely high probability that there's you've already got this shooter identified. He's with a doe, somewhere right up ahead he's going to be. And so now you can put on those passive brakes, those turtle brakes, that, without knowing he's there, you might rush in too quick, I guess, if that kind of makes sense. So, I mean, we've actually, Todd, over the last couple of years, when it gets to where it's lockdown stage, nobody's seeing any big bucks. We've actually taken where we'll just walk through the woods at a normal pace until we bump a big one on a doe. And yeah, I mean, it's a crazy tactic, and you can do it if you have big acreage public. You can pull it off. But if the situation's right, we've done that, and it's been productive.
And it seems like when a big buck is, especially these mature deer, when they're locked down with a doe, they have her in a spot where they want to have fun. They're not going to push her 2 miles, through 15 other bucks' territories if they don't have to.
Right. Exactly.
They want to keep her right there and just breed her and move on to the next one. But so then in those situations, you can use that against them, and that's where, like, just in the middle of the rut, when you get to that point, that's where, to me, this type of a tactic is just absolutely spot on, is because they have that moment of vulnerability, and you can take advantage of it. How, if you had to guess, how many times in a typical stalk, if you're stalking a buck with a doe, are the bucks immune to it? Or are they paying attention to anything but the doe, or do you generally get busted by the buck, the doe? How does it usually pan out?
Yeah, definitely the doe is usually the one I'm most concerned about, especially in situations where you got a big buck pegged and you cannot seem to get the visual on the doe, but you can just tell that she's there somewhere. Those are the ones that are really tricky, because you don't know how she's laying, which direction she's looking. You don't have a beat on her yet. She's the one with the wits, typically. Yep. That's how it works anyways. So, I mean, obviously you're always, keeping an eye on him too, but the doe is, definitely the one that usually gets you. And I mean, as far as movement, I mean, that's the biggest thing sneaking on deer, I think, typically, is your movement, and it's like you take your eyes off them for 1 second and try moving when you're not looking at them, and be in trouble sooner or later, and that's a big thing is that we found is, just keep your eyes on them when you do move. That way, if they look up or whatever, you can freeze. It sounds basic and it sounds simple, like, well, duh, you don't move but it's easy to do in certain situations. Like, it's easy to get complacent. You got this deer that's been looking away for 5 minutes, and that almost cost me that big deer. That's a whole nother story, but his doe basically, had been looking a different direction for 5 minutes. I went to move a little bit, and she wasn't on camera, so people didn't know that or see that. I think I kind of tried to explain it, but I moved when I took my eyes off her, because I was like, well, she's been looking over there. So that almost cost me that whole deal.
Wow. Wow, man.
So
the other thing too, over the years, when just for my own, just tree stand hunting, kind of bringing that stalking tactic in, there are very few animals in the woods that will walk continuously. And one of them is a human, and the other one's maybe a buck when he's completely enthralled in the rut, where he's just got that stumbling stupor of half dead, just stumbling through the woods. But it's amazing what you'll learn if you start slowing down and stopping on your walks in and taking a break and pausing, and then start to walk again. You can get away with a lot, man. You can get away with a lot of noise, leaf noise. Turkeys make so much noise. Squirrels make so much noise. And especially like around here, we have a lot of multiflower rose and a lot of honeysuckle. So anytime during October or November, there's usually really good cover in the timber anywhere. So you can use that to your benefit as well. So if there's one tactic, or like for all of us tree stand hunters, none of us who've been stalking, what is the one thing that you consider to be like your most important tool in the stalk, or one thing that that's always in the back of your mind as far as noise or movement? What's the one thing we got to really watch if we're going to try this season?
As far as any type of, tool outside of the weapon, binoculars is, if I don't have my binoculars with me, I feel like almost lost, whether I'm in wooded stuff or not. Because in wooded stuff, a lot of times I do I'll pick them up with the binoculars quite often. So as far as a tool goes, that's definitely, I'd rather be out there in blue jeans and a black t-shirt with binoculars than fully camoed without binoculars. I mean, that's just how important they are to me. So
is that how you're typically approaching let's just say a typical bedding area scenario? You're going in and you're glassing from the outside in.
Yeah. If I feel like there's something bedded, up ahead or whatever. Yeah, I'm spending a pretty good amount of time glassing, and for people that have a decent amount of experience, you can usually get a feel for when you're looking at a situation where they're maybe going to be. And so, you concentrate most of your time glassing in those spots. That's the biggest thing in sneaking on deer, in my opinion, is if you can see them before they see you. Obviously that sounds silly when I say it like that, but I mean, that's huge.
That's half the battle right there. Yeah.
See them. Because you can, just like you said, Todd, about how a human walks or whatever, but even on a quiet day, even on a super quiet day, if you've got a visual on them and they don't know that you're there, even on a quiet day, you can take your time, given you have enough time in that day, you can take your time and get pretty close on deer because of how even if they do hear you, as long as you don't make it sound like you're a human, a lot of times you can, they might glance over a couple times, but if you're looking at them and you freeze, a lot of times they won't see you unless you're pretty close, basically in bow range. I guess that's my biggest thing as far as the tool goes.
Jason, and I think your biggest tool is your brain, which is what I love about you, and I love the way you think about things, which is just, why do what everybody else is doing? I want to do what works, and what works for me is not necessarily what is going to work for everybody else. So it's taking the Jarrod Schefflers and the Todds and the Jasons and Daves and the different guys you watch, learning little bits and pieces, and then you can take it and make it work for your hunting strategy, season, or just to raise the bar. And I know I can't imagine doing what you're doing with a cameraman, which is what is the most impressive factor of the whole thing.
Jarrod, if we can, if David and I can abuse your public land knowledge, what in Wisconsin, let's just say, because that's where we live, obviously this probably doesn't work as well in Wisconsin as it does maybe in some parts of the state it does, but would it be fair to say that this works better in more open areas or not necessarily?
Yeah, typically. But if you've got an open enough woods, the trick when you're trying to spot and stalk in woods, the trick to that is, again, seeing them before they see you or hear you, kind of like what Todd was talking about earlier. So if you've got an open enough woods and the conditions are right, so I guess what I'm trying to say is if it's dead quiet out, I don't want to be in some sort of thick woods because they're going to hear me and they're going to be looking for me before I can even see them, if that makes sense. Does that kind of make sense or not really?
Absolutely.
I mean, it sounds, again, kind of basic, but I mean, if they can hear you before they can see you, before you can see them, that's bad. And there was that situation that I talked about earlier where we kind of came back to that piece, and that was in Iowa. We went away from it for a few days, and I made a comment, and I know it was in the video, where I was like, I don't think there's any way we're going to sneak in on anything this morning. It was a frosty, dead quiet morning. You know the type I'm talking about. And we did exactly what Todd talked about there is, not walking, like a normal human. And we tiptoed in there, and we tiptoed right into two bucks were like, right up in front of them. We got to within 40 yards of them, and they must have assumed that we were other deer, and they started sparring. And I know they heard us, and it was about a half hour later. We couldn't move on them because, we couldn't move up any further without busting them. So we put the brakes on. It was about a half hour later when this big 8-pointer came right up in there, right into our laps. But, if we'd have been walking like a normal human, we'd have blown those bucks out, and probably, they would have ran through, and that big 8-pointer would have went with them. Like, oh, there's danger over there. So, kind of what Todd, they're just sounding like a deer or something other than a human, something non-threatening.
There you go.
It's very important on those days where it's quiet out and whatnot. So,
and I've even gotten to the point now where when I'm stalking into some of my stands, I know I have a pretty good general idea where different deer are going to be bedding just based on topography and stuff. And I can usually get within 15 yards of them before I'll blow them out of their beds. But again, because I'm in thick honeysuckle, like what I've been doing now is I just instantly kneel down to the ground, don't look like a human. You know, if they go running away and they see you're standing up for them. And if anything, I will just kind of bend over and not, each situation is different, but I've had it happen before where you blow them out of their bed and they're half asleep when you blow them. So they don't know exactly what you were. And they kind of make a weird snort. It's like a surprise snort. It's not I know what you are, sucker. I'm going to snort at you snort. It's different. And you can get away with that. And I've blown little bucks and does out of their beds just where they have that, you know, whether they're half asleep or partially asleep, where you startle them. And they don't know what you are. And after that 2 or 3 bounds, they'll settle down and almost go back to feeding, or they'll find another place to lay down in bed. So if you do blow a deer out of their bed, don't necessarily think you've blown it, because I've had just this past late season, man, I had a 6-year-old come in on the same freaking hunt that was bedded just below, but because I wasn't a human, I didn't sound like a human, and I didn't act like a human. So they assumed that everything was back to normal. And I mean, I was sitting on a food plot earlier in the season, and I'm watching a possum out in front of me walking around in the food plot. I'm like, all right, this is kind of cool. And I watch a doe come out. She sees the possum and almost like ran through 2 deer through the timber to get away from it because it scared her. And she snorted several times, and within 5 minutes there were deer all out in the field. So again, these deer are getting spooked by weird stuff like that, and they're kind of used to other deer overreacting sometimes. So
absolutely. You know, go ahead, Todd.
Oh, it just sometimes you just can't throw in the towel, and sometimes I'm sure you guys have had that happen before too, where you'll blow a deer out, and then all of a sudden the thing will just calm right back down, and like, okay, that must not have been anything to worry about.
Yeah, and you know, I'm not talking about a 6 or 7-year-old here, but it's kind of interesting that you brought that up, because in 2012 we were hunting a piece in Wisconsin, and Scott and I were going into this piece, and we were tiptoeing along. And we bumped, it was 2 small bucks we bumped, and then they ended up bumping a few does, and the does didn't exactly know why. Well, these, you know, and so the does wanted to know why, and they ended up, you know, like those, sometimes they get curious, and they come in, and they're blowing, and they're stomping. I mean, probably 30, 40 times. You know, and I was just like, just be patient, you know, we'll just wait them out, whatever. And once you know it, I'm sure this buck, it was pre-rut. I'm sure it was a 4-year-old. I'm sure this buck heard them blowing. And I think a lot of times, you know, they're out there, just like you said, they're blowing at stuff all the time. But in my experience, what I've seen is they blow one and done, and I'm getting out of here. Well, that alarms, you know, the deer. But when they're sitting there in the same area, blowing, I've watched big bucks do this before. It's almost like they're annoyed, like, shut up already. Like, you know, you don't have anything to really be blowing about. And they almost look annoyed by it. You know, the first once or twice, they're like, oh, there's something over there. And then after a while, they just like, almost like ignore it. And I'm pretty sure this big 4-year-old heard these does blowing and was around, you know, probably 300-400 yards away or whatever, heard them blowing and was like, oh, there's does over there, you know, and it's getting into that, you know, it's pre-rut, you know, coming into rut almost. And I think he came right in to check him out. And, well, I pretty much know he did, because he walked right into him, you know, right past where we had just walked and stalked for the last 200 yards. Like, we would have blown him out of there if he was in there. It was pretty open. And he came in and he chased these does around right in front of us while they're blowing and everything.
There it is, brother. And
we did that twice, 2 other situations that year where we bumped does or fawns, and they stood there and blew. In fact, we had this happen. It was about a week and a half later. 2 fawns jumped, started blowing, and Shay was filming me. And I remember him making like, we might as well, you know, move on. And I just kept glassing the woods. About 10, 15 minutes later, I spot this like 160s laying down. You know, he was a little bit nervous, but he ended up calming, laying back down right there. And we didn't have real good conditions. And by the time we had to take our time, by the time we got there and popped up over the top, he must have moseyed off. I don't think he ever knew we were there. But, you know, that was another situation where, you know, don't freak out. They're, you know, they're just doing their thing. They blow at stuff all the time. So.
Not only that, here's another one for you. I've personally witnessed, I filmed one this past year. Eventually we'll get it up on our web show probably, but I filmed one big buck fight that ended with the loser spending 15 minutes snorting at the winner. And I think, honestly, he was so just pissed off and frustrated because he didn't win and he couldn't win. And he just was like, all right, if I'm not going to have him, then I don't want you to have him either. And so he just snorted and snorted. And that's the second time we've documented that on video. We did it years ago. So really? I think a lot of times your submissive animals, what else do they have to do other than just snort? And it drives them crazy. I think there's almost an association with that in sex with these animals, where if you've got an animal that's going bananas and snorting and snorting and snorting and snorting, and it's that time of year, just like what you said, man, it makes sense. It almost is like this is where, the action's happening, man.
Yeah. I never thought about that before. I guess because I've never seen it before, but that makes sense. And I, just deer have personalities as, just like humans. And I think some of those deer that throw a tantrum like that are just like, some people that throw a tantrum or a baby fit, So, well, if I can't win, well, then nobody's gonna, or whatever, so,
Crazy animals, man. Gotta love it.
Yeah, they are.
Well, hey guys, we're getting close to the end of our time. I think Dave's got a question for you, real quick, Jared, and then we'll wrap it up and talk a little bit about what you've got going on this weekend and what we've got going on this weekend and all that fun stuff.
Perfect.
Jared, I was just curious, have you always been into traditional archery, or is that something that came along, kind of as an evolution in your career, if you will?
More of an evolution. When I grew up on the farm, we had, some longbows that we chased bunny rabbits around with and stuff before, when we were young kids. And my dad had some recurves. In one summer, I think I was 15 or 16 then. And I spent a summer, shooting his recurve, trying to get good with it, but I just never did. So I didn't touch another one until it was the fall of 2011. A buddy of mine put his recurve in my hand just to shoot a handful of times, and I loved it. And I could see some of the benefits to having it when you're close quarters on a mature deer on the ground that knows you're there and you don't have much time to make the shot happen. I could see where it could have some advantages, and I've seen some different situations that season, and reflecting on some other situations that I was like, you know what, I need to give this a whirl. And so 2012 was the season where I guess I've hunted strictly with a longbow since then.
I'll just put it this way.
And it goes both ways. A compound is an unbelievable weapon, and a longbow is, and a recurve as well. They're all unbelievable weapons in the certain situations. There's definitely been deer that, I'm sure I would have gotten with a compound that I didn't, with a longbow. But there's also been situations where I've gotten deer with a longbow that I don't think I would have ever got with the compound. And especially when you're talking about a mature deer, an older deer, inside of 20 yards that knows you're there and you don't have much time to make it happen. And when you're hunting deer on the ground like that, how we hunt, you can stay lower to the ground. You can manipulate the weapon a little bit more. There's a lot of advantages. And, to be fair, I'd say it works out about 50-50. So,
well, it's an awesome element to what you do, though. I'm impressed.
Yeah.
And the cool part about it is anybody can watch these guys because they have everything on film, all these different encounters, the ones that they blew, the ones that they were successful with. You can literally see how they're doing it. And I'd recommend anybody to check out the Whitetail Adrenaline series of DVDs. You guys are up to 9 now, Jared?
It's been 10 seasons. We got 12 videos.
12 videos.
Two videos the last few years, but there's been 9 public land seasons. The next season coming out the next season coming out will be 9. So 8 public land seasons, and then the first season was a by permission and public video. So yeah.
Cool, man. And if anybody, if you've never seen the guys at the shows, they have a cult following. And some of the coolest Whitetail Adrenaline gear you've ever seen, T-shirts, hats, hoodies, of all kinds for men, women, children, and they are known for it. You go to these shows, and it's pretty impressive to see how many Whitetail Adrenaline hoodies and T-shirts, and you've got a lot of supporters out there, man, a lot of people who dig what you're doing. And And I sure appreciate it. And I think there's a lot of us that have been in this industry a long time who may or may not like certain aspects of it. And you're one of my favorite parts of it. So I'm glad that you were able to do our show with us, and hopefully we can turn it into a regular deal.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been fun listening to someone who does it completely different than I do. And for that matter, probably I can speak for Dave and say the way he does. And Todd, for that matter. But speaking of trade shows and all that good stuff, we talked earlier about being at the Madison Deer and Turkey Expo. So you're going to be there this weekend. It's in Madison at the Alliant Energy Center. It starts at 2 o'clock on Friday, correct? 2 or 3, and goes till, I think, 9 o'clock on Friday evening, and then it opens back up again Saturday till 6 or 7, and then Sunday till 4. If people that are listening to this, and we've got listeners all over, actually all over the world, we're learning, where could they get some of your videos? Because, definitely they're worth a watch. I've got most, if not all of them. Where could they get your video if they can't come to a trade show?
We got a number on our website, or it should be on our website. I guess I haven't looked at it in a while, but I'm pretty sure that's up to date with all our dealers. So we've got them out there in different retailers, and then always online. My sister Danae, she handles all the online orders, and I don't know what else ever told me that, hey, somebody ordered it from here and we couldn't ship it. So I'm pretty sure we can ship anywhere.
Okay.
So that would be the other place to get them.
For those of you listening who can't get to a trade show, I'll go ahead and put in the show notes how to get a hold of your website. Which is www.whitetailadrenaline.com. Correct?
You got it.
All right.
You got it.
Great. Well, on behalf of myself and Dave and Todd, thanks a lot for taking the time to talk with us. And I think we absolutely need to do this again, because David and I have a lot of questions about public hunting in general. And maybe we can get down to that a little bit later here in the year as we get closer to season, how you decide,
Sure.
What you pick, where you pick it, and how you go about doing that. But this has absolutely been entertaining. And Dave, do you have any final thoughts?
No, I just want to thank you, Jared. It's been a blast.
You gotta be honest, it's definitely been fun. Sorry you had to listen to all my hula baloo this last hour, but hopefully it was worthwhile.
Hey, I got to ask you: do you still use?
Yeah.
Do you still use the elastic bungee cord around your camera, or over your shoulder?
Yeah, on the smaller cameras. Yeah, we still run those.
Okay.
Our bigger camera, we need to get a bigger one if we were going to make one of those. So
I'll never forget my first trade show. First of all, you can't miss your booth, and you couldn't miss it. I don't know. We started this in 2008, didn't we, Dave?
Yeah.
I remember meeting you at that trade show, and you were showing your bungee cord setup, and I'm like, and I walked back going, "Who is this guy?" And then
what drugs is he on?
Well, I didn't want to go there, but I'm like, Dave, you got to go over and check this booth out. And then we did, and we talked, and it was cool. And then took your videos home and watched them. But again, it's been our pleasure. And again, if you're going to go to the Deer and Turkey Expo this weekend, certainly stop by the Whitetail Adrenaline booth. And again, you can't miss it. Well, there you have it, our conversation with Jarrod Scheffler from Whitetail Adrenaline. Like it or not, his tactics definitely have proven to be successful over the years, and he was definitely a ton of fun to listen to. So look for us to talk with him in the future, probably a little bit more about how he finds public land, what exactly he looks for in that land, and how he goes about making a decision whether he's going to hunt a particular state or a particular area, and then how he goes ahead and does it. So hopefully we can pry some of that information out of him. Well, with that, we're going to close out the show for today. Before I do that, though, I just want to invite all of you that are in the Madison area to stop down to the Wisconsin Deer and Turkey Expo this coming weekend. As I referenced before, we are all going to be there. David will be in the Ozonics booth on Saturday all day. I'll be in the Ozonics booth on Sunday all day. Todd and Katie, of course, will be in the Wicked booth. Check out their new pruners, their hand pruner from Wicked Tree Gear. And also Jarrod Scheffler from Whitetail Adrenaline will be in his booth. You can't miss his booth. It's got the full body mount of one of the bucks that he shot. Again, if you have the opportunity to, please give us a review on Stitcher or iTunes. If you listen on an iPod, iPad, or any iDevice, please go to the app that they have and punch in White Knuckle Podcast. This will help you to download the podcast app produced by Apple and subscribe to the show within that app. Every time that I produce a show, you'll get notified and it will get downloaded right to your device. Thanks again for listening and have a great day, and we hope to see you this weekend.